The biker sneered, his boots slamming into the old German shepherd. A blind woman's scream tore through the street, but it wasn't fear, it was something deeper. The dog didn't whimper. It turned, eyes dark with recognition. Its past awakened. The early morning air was crisp, laced with the lingering scent of damp pavement. The city had not yet woken, and only the quiet hum of distant traffic disturbed the silence. Amidst this slumbering world, Eleanor moved with practiced grace, her hand firmly gripping the harness of her guide dog, Titan. Titan, a large German shepherd with a coat of black and rust, walked beside her with precision. His steps, measured and intentional, were an extension of her own. They had been inseparable for 5 years now. He was more than her eyes. He was her protector, her lifeline. Eleanor had lost her sight 7 years ago. An accident, an instant that shattered everything. The last thing she ever saw was a blur of headlights before darkness consumed her world. But in losing her vision, she gained something she never anticipated, an unbreakable bond with Titan. He had entered her life not just as a guide, but as a silent guardian with a past she had only partially uncovered. There were nights when Titan would wake suddenly, muscles coiled, his ears perked toward an unseen presence. Eleanor had learned to trust his instincts, even when she couldn't understand what had triggered them. Titan had been trained as a police K-9 before an injury forced him into early retirement. Eleanor didn't know the details of his past assignments, only that he had once served alongside officers in some of the city's most dangerous cases. His scars, thin silver lines along his flank and one just beneath his eye, hinted at a life of violence, of battles fought in the shadows. But now his world was different. He was hers, and she was his. As Eleanor navigated the familiar streets toward her usual cafe, Titan's body tensed. She felt it instantly through the harness, the way his breathing slowed, the subtle but undeniable shift in his demeanor. "Easy, boy," she murmured, running her fingers along his head, feeling the ripple of tension beneath his fur. Titan never reacted without reason. She turned her head slightly, listening. The street was quiet. Too quiet. Then came the sound, the deep guttural revving of a motorcycle engine, growing louder, more aggressive. The sound of the approaching bike sent a familiar unease through Eleanor. She had learned to read the world differently now, not through sight, but through sound, movement, even the shifting air around her. And right now, something wasn't right. Titan moved closer, his massive frame pressing slightly against her leg in reassurance. The motorcycle skidded to a stop nearby, the scent of gasoline mixing with the morning chill. Eleanor turned her head toward the direction of the sound, her grip on Titan's harness tightening. "Well, well," a voice sneered. It was rough, laced with arrogance. "A blind lady out alone. You must be real trusting to think the world is that kind." Eleanor said nothing. Titan, however, remained utterly still. His training had taught him restraint, but Eleanor could feel the quiet fury simmering beneath his controlled exterior. A second voice chuckled. "Look at that mutt. Bet he's all bark, no bite." Eleanor's jaw clenched. People like this, people who saw vulnerability and mistook it for weakness, were the ones who made the world feel smaller, more dangerous. She inhaled slowly, keeping her composure. The weight of Titan's presence at her side was reassuring, a silent reminder that she was never truly alone. Then it happened. A sharp sound, a swift, cruel impact, a boot striking flesh. Titan let out a sharp exhale, but there was no whimper, no yelp of pain. The world seemed to still, and Eleanor felt it, the weight shifting, the air thick with something primal. She reached down, her hand finding Titan's body, her fingers brushing over his ribs. He was steady, unshaken. Eleanor's pulse quickened. This was wrong. This wasn't just someone being cruel for the sake of it. There was a malice in the air, something ugly and mean-spirited. "What's the matter, lady?" The biker's voice was mocking, his amusement evident. "Didn't hear me coming?" Eleanor gritted her teeth. She refused to give them the satisfaction of a reaction. She wouldn't cower. Titan's breathing had changed. It was controlled, measured, but Eleanor could feel the shift in his muscles. She didn't know much about his past, but she knew one thing for certain. These men had just made a grave mistake. A faint growl rumbled deep in Titan's chest, low and controlled, like the sound of distant thunder before a storm. Eleanor had never heard that sound before. He had always been disciplined, careful, measured in his responses. But now, he was something else entirely. The biker who had kicked him took a step back, clearly expecting a normal dog's reaction. Whining, retreating, fear. Instead, Titan simply turned his head, slowly, deliberately, and stared at him. The second biker laughed. "Oh, come on, man. You scared of a seeing-eye dog?" But something in the first biker's stance had shifted. His breath had quickened, though he tried to hide it. He had expected an easy target, a harmless mutt, but what he got was something else entirely. Titan's ears were pinned back slightly, his muscles taut, his eyes locked onto his target with unshakable focus. Eleanor couldn't see the confrontation unfolding, but she could feel the shift in the air. Titan wasn't afraid. Titan was waiting, and for the first time, the biker hesitated. The street, which had moments ago been nothing more than a quiet morning path, had now transformed into a battlefield of tension. Eleanor's grip on Titan's harness remained firm, but her pulse quickened. She had spent years learning to navigate the world through her remaining senses, and right now, everything in her body told her that danger loomed closer. Titan didn't move. He remained a statue of control, his body coiled with restrained power. The biker who had kicked him, a man with a rough voice and the stink of sweat and motor oil, took another step back. Eleanor could hear the faint scuff of his boots on the pavement, the slight shuffle of weight shifting between hesitation and arrogance. "What's the matter?" the second biker taunted, the smirk evident in his voice. "Didn't hit him hard enough?" Titan's deep growl filled the air again, this time with a sharper edge. It wasn't the sound of a dog caught off guard. It was the sound of something trained, something precise, something that had seen battle before and knew exactly how to end it. The first biker hesitated. Eleanor could sense it in the silence. He thought he had kicked an ordinary mutt, some useless guide dog that would cower at the blow. But Titan hadn't even flinched. "I don't like the way that dog's looking at me," the first biker muttered. "Oh, for God's sake," his friend scoffed. "It's a damn guide dog." Eleanor took a slow, careful breath. She didn't want to provoke them further, but she wasn't about to let them walk away thinking they could get away with something like this. "I'd leave now if I were you," she said, her voice calm but unwavering. A beat of silence. Then laughter. "Or what?" the second biker sneered. "Your little puppy gonna save you?" Eleanor didn't answer. Titan did. It happened in a flash, too fast for the men to process, but Eleanor felt it. The controlled shift of weight, the subtle vibration of Titan's movement through the harness. A sharp, deep bark exploded from Titan's chest, a sound so forceful that it cut through the morning air like a warning shot. The first biker stumbled backward, cursing. The second biker's laughter stopped. Titan didn't lunge, didn't snap. He didn't need to. His posture alone sent a message clearer than any words Eleanor could have spoken. This wasn't a pet. This wasn't just a guide dog. This was something else. Eleanor tightened her grip on the harness, not to restrain Titan, but to ground herself. She could feel the way his body was poised, ready. If the men took even one step closer, he wouldn't hold back. She wasn't worried about Titan. She was worried about them. The first biker spat onto the pavement. "That mutt's gonna get put down one day," he snarled, but his voice lacked the confidence it had before. Eleanor stood her ground. "Not today." Another pause. Then, with one last curse under his breath, the first biker backed away toward his motorcycle. His friend followed, though Eleanor could still hear the irritation in his breath. Engines roared to life, a final rev. And then, they were gone. The silence they left behind was almost deafening. Eleanor exhaled, her body still tense. Her fingers ran over Titan's head, brushing through the thick fur at the base of his neck. "Good boy," she whispered. Titan let out a slow breath, his body relaxing at last. But Eleanor knew better than to believe it was over. This wasn't just some random act of cruelty. There was something about the way those bikers had acted, something off about their presence on this quiet street at such an early hour. Titan had sensed it before she even knew they were there. And Eleanor had learned, long ago, to always trust Titan. The morning should have resumed as normal. Eleanor should have continued on her path to the cafe, ordered her usual coffee, and let the tension of the encounter melt away into routine. But as she and Titan moved forward, something didn't sit right. Titan remained on high alert, his body language stiff. Eleanor felt the weight of his tension through the harness. He wasn't convinced the danger was gone. Neither was she. As they reached the cafe, the familiar scent of roasted coffee beans filled the air. The door chimed softly as she stepped inside, Titan guiding her effortlessly through the space. "Morning, Eleanor," the barista Clara greeted her. Eleanor forced a small smile. "Morning, Clara." "You okay?" Eleanor hesitated, then nodded. "Ran into some trouble on the way here. A couple of bikers thought it would be fun to mess with Titan." A sharp intake of breath. "Are you serious? Did they—" "He's fine," Eleanor assured her, reaching down to stroke Titan's fur again. "He handled it." Clara huffed. "Some people are just, ugh. Do you want me to call someone? The cops?" Eleanor shook her head. They left. For now. Clara still didn't seem convinced, but she let it go. "The usual?" "Yes, please." As she waited, Eleanor took a seat near the window. Titan sat beside her, his body still angled slightly toward the entrance. He wasn't relaxed, and that told Eleanor everything. She reached down, running her fingers through his fur. "What is it, boy?" she murmured. Titan's ears twitched. His head turned slightly. Eleanor felt her own body tense in response. She couldn't see anything, but she trusted Titan's instincts more than her own. The cafe was quiet, filled only with the occasional sound of steaming milk and casual chatter. But outside, something was wrong. The door chimed again. Someone had entered. Eleanor straightened slightly, Titan's body shifting subtly at her side. A chair scraped against the floor nearby. Heavy boots, a scent, leather, and something metallic. The biker. She knew it before he even spoke. "Guess you weren't expecting to see me again so soon," the man said. Eleanor kept her posture calm. "I wasn't expecting to see you at all." A low chuckle. "Yeah, well, figured I'd grab a coffee before I go." Titan let out a quiet but unmistakable growl. Eleanor didn't try to stop him. "You know," the biker continued, "I got to thinking. That's a real nice dog you got there." Eleanor's fingers tightened around Titan's harness. "I bet a dog like that ain't cheap." Eleanor's stomach turned cold. This wasn't random cruelty. This was something else entirely. Titan had been trained to protect. And right now, Eleanor knew he was ready. But she had the sinking feeling that this was only the beginning. The cafe had always been a place of comfort for Eleanor, a sanctuary of warmth, familiar voices, and the rich aroma of coffee filling the air. But now, it felt different. The walls seemed to close in, the clinking of cups and hushed conversations fading beneath the weight of the biker's presence. Titan remained stiff beside her, his muscles tensed like a coiled spring. Eleanor could feel his heartbeat through the harness, steady but alert. He was waiting, watching, calculating. The biker didn't sit at a table. Instead, he loomed nearby, his presence invasive, his voice coated in something sickly sweet. "I was just thinking," he continued, dragging a chair out and dropping into it with a casual arrogance. "A dog like that? He's got to be worth a lot of money." Eleanor kept her expression neutral, her grip on Titan tightening. "He's not for sale." A low chuckle. "That's a shame." She could hear the scrape of his gloves against the wooden table, the tap of his fingers drumming against the surface. He was playing a game, testing the waters. Eleanor had dealt with men like him before, the ones who mistook her blindness for weakness, the ones who thought she was an easy target. But she wasn't. And neither was Titan. "I don't know much about dogs," the biker mused, as if speaking to himself. "But I do know a well-trained one when I see it. That's no ordinary mutt." Eleanor didn't respond. Titan's low guttural growl filled the space between them. It was barely audible, but the warning was clear. Clara, the barista, cleared her throat loudly from behind the counter. "Hey, buddy," she called, her voice sharp. "You ordering something or just creeping people out?" The biker let out an amused exhale. "Relax, sweetheart. Just making conversation." "Well, don't." Clara's voice was firm. "You're making people uncomfortable." Eleanor could hear the tension in the cafe shift. Conversations had quieted. People were listening now, watching. For a long moment, the biker said nothing. Then his chair scraped against the floor as he stood. "Guess I'll be going then." His voice was laced with something unspoken, something that made Eleanor's skin prickle. He took a slow step toward her table. Titan tensed, his growl deepening. The biker chuckled under his breath. "Good dog." Then, as if nothing had happened, he turned and walked toward the door. Eleanor waited, listening to the sound of his boots against the tile, the jingle of the door chime as he stepped outside. Titan didn't move. He was still listening. And Eleanor knew what that meant. It wasn't over. The cafe remained still long after the biker had left. The hum of conversation was slow to return, people shifting in their seats, exchanging quiet glances. Eleanor exhaled, trying to loosen the tightness in her chest. Clara approached, setting Eleanor's coffee down with a little more force than necessary. "That guy gave me the creeps." "You and me both," Eleanor murmured, reaching out to wrap her hands around the warmth of the cup. Clara hesitated before speaking again, her voice lower this time. "You think he's going to cause more trouble?" Titan hadn't relaxed. That was enough of an answer. "I think," Eleanor said carefully, "he's not the type to let things go." Clara muttered something under her breath before sighing. "Do you want me to walk you home?" Eleanor appreciated the offer, but she knew it wouldn't make a difference. If that man wanted to find her again, he would. "No," she said. "Titan's got me." Clara hesitated, then nodded. "All right, but if anything happens, you call me, okay?" "I will." Eleanor finished her coffee, listening to Titan's steady breaths, feeling the occasional twitch of his muscles beneath her fingers. He was still unsettled, still listening to something she couldn't hear. She knew she should head home. But something told her that home wasn't safe anymore. The streets were quieter than before, the morning rush having passed. Eleanor walked at her usual pace, her cane tapping lightly against the sidewalk, Titan leading her with precision. She listened carefully to her surroundings. Footsteps, distant traffic, the rustling of leaves in the occasional breeze, and something else, something familiar. She slowed, Titan adjusting his pace immediately. The sound wasn't obvious, but it was there, the faint rumble of a motorcycle engine, idling somewhere nearby. She didn't panic. Panic led to mistakes. Instead, she kept moving, listening, tracking the sound with her mind. Titan's ears flicked back. He had heard it too. The engine revved slightly, then cut out. Eleanor turned at the next corner, moving toward a busier street. If he was following her, she needed witnesses. Titan led her smoothly, never hesitating, always aware. A few minutes passed. No motorcycle, no voices. Just the normal sounds of the city. But Eleanor had spent too long trusting her instincts to ignore the feeling in her gut. She wasn't alone. As she neared her apartment building, Titan slowed. Not because he was tired, but because he sensed something. She reached out, trailing her fingers along the metal railing leading up the steps. Titan's posture had changed, his weight shifting subtly as he stood closer to her side. Eleanor turned her head slightly, listening. A breath. Too close. Titan moved first. A sudden vicious snarl tore through the silence as Titan lunged forward, his body no longer a controlled guide, but a weapon unleashed. A curse, a scuffle, a man's sharp intake of breath, followed by quick, retreating footsteps. Eleanor's heart pounded, her grip tightening on Titan's harness as she held him back. Then, silence. She inhaled, exhaled. She reached down, her fingers grazing Titan's head. His fur bristled beneath her touch, his breath hot with restrained fury. Whoever had been there was gone now. But they had been too close. Too close. Titan had known before she did. And now, Eleanor was certain of one thing. This wasn't just harassment. It wasn't just some thug trying to scare her. Someone was watching, following, waiting. And Eleanor didn't know why. But she did know this. Titan would protect her, no matter what. The lock clicked into place as Eleanor shut the door behind her. She stood still for a moment, her hand resting against the cool wood. Her breath measured, but uneven. Titan was beside her, his body pressed close, his fur still bristling with residual tension. She reached for the light switch out of habit before remembering. Darkness was always her reality now. But something about this moment felt different, heavier. She had felt fear before. The world wasn't kind to people like her. But this wasn't the usual unease of navigating a city built for those who could see. This was something else. This was being hunted. She took a slow breath, listening. The faint hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock on the wall, the muted sounds of the city outside. Nothing unusual, nothing except the feeling crawling up her spine. Titan hadn't moved from her side. She ran a hand over his head, feeling the tension in his body. "We're okay," she whispered. But she wasn't sure she believed it. She set her cane by the door and moved toward the living room. Titan followed, his paws barely making a sound against the hardwood floor. She lowered herself onto the couch, exhaustion washing over her. What did they want? It wasn't just random cruelty, she knew that now. The way the biker had spoken to her, the way he had followed her, it wasn't an accident. And then there was Titan. They knew he wasn't an ordinary guide dog. They had seen it in the way he reacted, the way he held himself. They had recognized something. But how? She exhaled slowly, trying to piece everything together. Titan had been a police K-9 before he was hers. She didn't know much about his past, only that he had been injured in the line of duty and retired early. The officer who had handled his adoption had told her he was one of the best, intelligent, fiercely loyal, highly trained. Had someone from his past recognized him? The thought unsettled her. Titan had never been just a pet. He had always carried something with him. Memories, instincts. What if his past had finally caught up with him? Her fingers tightened in his fur. "What happened before you met me, Titan?" she whispered. Titan didn't answer, but his silence felt heavy. She leaned back, rubbing her temples. Maybe she was overthinking this. Maybe it was just some thug who had seen an opportunity to intimidate her. Maybe it was just about money. Maybe he thought Titan was valuable and wanted to steal him. But then why follow her home? Why wait in the shadows? Titan let out a soft growl, snapping her from her thoughts. She stiffened. What is it? She didn't hear anything, but she had learned to trust Titan's instincts more than her own. Slowly, she stood, one hand gripping the couch, the other resting against Titan's back. Then, a noise. Faint. Outside. Titan moved before she did, positioning himself between her and the door. Eleanor's breath caught. Was it just her paranoia, or was someone really out there? She reached for her phone, her fingers shaking slightly. She couldn't call 911 and tell them she felt something wrong. They needed facts, evidence. Titan growled again, louder this time. Then, footsteps, right outside her apartment door. Her stomach turned to ice. Titan's body tensed. Whoever it was, they weren't just passing by. They were waiting. Eleanor's mind raced. She needed to act, but she couldn't see. She didn't know where they were, what they were doing. But Titan did, and he wasn't afraid. She reached for the harness, gripping it tightly. "Titan," she whispered. "Stay." He obeyed, but she could feel the raw energy in his body, the barely contained force ready to be unleashed. A shadow passed under the doorframe. She couldn't see it, but she felt it, an unnatural darkness pressing against her senses. Then, a knock, software slow, deliberate. Eleanor swallowed hard. She didn't move. The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled too tight. Then, another knock. Titan's growl deepened into something darker, something meant to warn, to threaten. The presence outside hesitated. Then, footsteps retreating. The sound faded. Titan didn't move until minutes later, when Eleanor finally exhaled and sank onto the couch, her legs weak beneath her. She buried her face in her hands, her mind spinning. This wasn't over. It was only beginning. Titan sat beside her, his warm weight grounding her. She wasn't alone, but she was being watched, and whoever was out there, they weren't done with her yet. Eleanor didn't sleep that night. She sat in the dim glow of her apartment, Titan pressed against her legs, his breathing deep but alert. The knock at her door still echoed in her mind, each replay a fresh reminder that she wasn't imagining things. Someone was watching. Someone wanted something, and they weren't going to stop. She ran her fingers through Titan's fur, grounding herself. He was calm but tense, his body always angled toward the door. He was waiting for them to come back. Her hands tightened into fists. She wasn't helpless. She refused to be. She had lived in darkness for years, and she had learned to survive in it. Whoever these people were, they thought she was weak. They thought she was an easy target. They were wrong. Morning came with the sound of the city waking up around her. The hum of traffic, the distant chatter of pedestrians, the scent of rain lingering in the air. Eleanor went about her routine, trying to push aside the gnawing unease. She got dressed, fed Titan, made coffee, but every movement felt weighted, every sound outside her door sharpened. She had to do something. She needed answers. Titan walked beside her as they stepped onto the street. She moved with purpose, her cane tapping steadily against the pavement. Her destination was clear: the police station. She had never reported anything before. She had learned, over time, that calling the police as a blind woman often led to little more than sympathetic reassurances. But this was different. Titan wasn't just a guide dog. He was a retired K-9, a police officer before he was hers. And that meant someone in the department might know about his past, might know why these men were after her. The walk was uneventful, but Titan remained tense. Eleanor didn't need to see him to know. She felt it in the way he moved, the way he listened, the way he was waiting. The station was a familiar space, clean, cold, the scent of coffee and old paper lingering in the air. She approached the front desk, her cane tapping softly against the tiled floor. The officer behind the desk greeted her with polite confusion. "Ma'am, can I help you?" Eleanor took a breath. "I need to speak with someone about my service dog. He's a retired K-9A paws." "And what exactly do you need to report?" "I think someone from his past is looking for him." Another pause. Eleanor heard the quiet click of a keyboard. The officer was checking something. Then, "What's the dog's name?" "Titan." Silence. A longer pause this time. Then, the officer's voice, more serious now. "Hold on. I'll get someone." Eleanor tightened her grip on Titan's harness. Something wasn't right. Minutes later, a new voice. A man, deep and measured. "Ms. Carter?" She turned toward the sound. "Yes. This is Detective James Holloway. Can we talk in my office?" Eleanor hesitated. She wasn't expecting this, but she nodded. Yes. Titan led her forward, and she followed the detective into a quieter space. The door shut. Silence settled around them. Then, "You said your dog's name is Titan." "Yes." "And you think someone is after him?" Eleanor frowned. "I know someone is. They've been following me, watching my apartment." Holloway exhaled, a heavy sound. "Ms. Carter, Titan isn't just a retired K-9. Eleanor felt her pulse quicken. "What do you mean?" Holloway hesitated. Then, his chair creaked as he leaned forward. Titan was part of an undercover operation before he was retired, a major one. He was trained not just for drug detection but for high-risk takedowns. Eleanor swallowed. And his last case involved one of the most dangerous motorcycle gangs in the city. The room felt colder. Eleanor's grip on Titan's harness tightened. "What happened?" "He helped bring down a smuggling operation, weapons, drugs. Some of the gang members went to prison, but some didn't." Eleanor's breath came slow and steady, but inside, her mind was racing. "They remember him," Holloway said. "They know what he did. And if they've found you—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Eleanor already knew. She was a target now. The room felt suffocating. Eleanor pressed a hand against Titan's back, feeling the slow rise and fall of his breath. He was calm, focused, but she could feel it. He understood. She took a slow breath. "What do I do?" Holloway exhaled. "We can put you into protective custody." "No." The answer came faster than she expected. Holloway hesitated. "Ms. Carter, these men—" "I'm not hiding." She had spent too much of her life learning to stand her ground. She wasn't about to let some faceless threat take that away from her. Holloway was quiet for a moment. Then, "Do you have any weapons?" Eleanor almost laughed. "I'm blind." He didn't miss a beat. "That's not what I asked." She hesitated. "No." Holloway leaned back. "Then we need a plan." Eleanor nodded. "Tell me what to do." That night, she waited. Titan lay at her feet, his body still, his ears sharp. Holloway had sent an unmarked patrol to watch the building, but Eleanor knew that if the gang was determined, they wouldn't stop. She didn't sleep. And then, footsteps. Titan lifted his head. Eleanor's heart pounded. The sound was familiar. The biker. Then, something else. A metallic click, a lock being picked. Eleanor's breath hitched. Titan moved, his body tense, silent. The lock turned. Eleanor reached down, pressing a hand against Titan's harness. "Now," she whispered. Titan launched forward. A scream, a crash, a gunshot. Eleanor flinched, ducking low. Titan snarled, the sound feral, deadly. The scuffle was violent, bodies crashing into furniture. Then, silence, heavy breathing, Titan's breathing. Eleanor straightened, her hands shaking. "Titan?" A low whine. She reached out, running her hands over his fur. No wounds, no blood. Then, the sound of sirens in the distance. The police arrived minutes later. The biker lay on the floor, groaning in pain. Titan had subdued him. Eleanor exhaled, shaking. She wasn't afraid anymore. She was ready, and whoever came next, Titan would be waiting. The flashing red and blue lights painted streaks of color across Eleanor's apartment walls. The muffled voices of officers filled the hallway as they restrained the biker, his curses barely coherent through the pain. Eleanor stood in the middle of her living room, her hand resting on Titan's back. His breathing was steady, his body pressed against her legs, still standing guard. Even though the immediate threat was gone, he hadn't relaxed. Detective Holloway's voice cut through the noise. "Get him out of here. I want a full report." Boots scuffled against the hardwood as the officers dragged the intruder away. Eleanor didn't move. She hadn't spoken since the attack. It wasn't shock. It was something else. Something heavier. Titan had saved her life. Again. Holloway exhaled as he approached. You okay? Eleanor tilted her head slightly, listening to the sounds around her. The radio chatter outside, the low murmur of officers speaking, Titan's slow, steady breathing. She nodded. I'm not hurt. Holloway hesitated before stepping closer. You should sit down. I'm fine. Eleanor. His voice was softer now. You just survived an attack. I know. She reached down, her fingers brushing over Titan's fur. He leaned into her touch. Holloway sighed. He did good. Eleanor smiled faintly. He always does. Silence stretched between them for a moment. Then Holloway cleared his throat. The man they just took into custody? We ran his prints. Eleanor tensed. He's part of the same gang Titan helped take down. Holloway's voice was grim. And he's not the only one still out there. Eleanor's grip on Titan's harness tightened. Then this isn't over. No, Holloway admitted. It's not. The following days passed in a blur of police reports, interviews, and constant surveillance. Holloway had insisted on extra protection outside her apartment, but Eleanor knew that wouldn't last forever. The gang wasn't going to stop just because one of their own had been caught. Titan had taken something from them years ago. Now they wanted him back. Eleanor sat on her couch, running her fingers through Titan's fur. He had been with her for 5 years, his past nothing more than a vague memory tucked away in old police records. She had never asked questions before. Now she had to. She called Holloway. I want to know everything. He didn't hesitate. An hour later, Holloway arrived at her apartment. He sat across from her, a thick file in his hands. Eleanor listened as he placed it on the table between them. Titan wasn't just a K-9, Holloway said. He was the best. Trained for deep cover operations, drug busts, high-risk takedowns. Eleanor swallowed. She already knew Titan was special. But this was something else. His last mission was a raid on a motorcycle gang known as the Black Vultures. They were running weapons through the city, moving drugs across state lines. Dangerous men, killers. Eleanor felt Titan shift beside her, as if he recognized the name. Holloway continued. Titan was the only K-9 on that case. He sniffed out the shipment before it was moved. If not for him, those weapons would have disappeared. Eleanor exhaled slowly. And the gang never forgot. Holloway nodded. They lost millions because of him. And now they know where he is. Silence. Eleanor traced her fingers along the harness at Titan's side. He's not just my guide dog, she said softly. No, Holloway agreed. He's a target. Eleanor lifted her chin. So what do we do? That night, Eleanor sat with Titan on the floor of her apartment, her back against the couch, his head resting on her lap. She should have been afraid, but she wasn't. She was ready. If the Black Vultures wanted to come for Titan, they would learn the same lesson their friend had. Titan wasn't just a guide dog. He was a warrior, and he wasn't going anywhere. Neither was she. Eleanor had spent years learning to live in darkness, but now she saw the truth more clearly than ever. Strength wasn't about sight. It was about resilience, about standing firm even when the world thought you couldn't. And Titan? He wasn't just a protector. He was family. What would you have done in Eleanor's place? Have you ever had a moment where you had to fight for yourself or someone you love? Let us know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful narratives that remind us all of what truly matters.